So, Xalavier, um, to sort of like get started, and you're gonna hate me for this first question that I'm about to ask you.
Sure.
I really want to know, what's the deal with the Denny's thing?
So I had never been to Denny's, and then a friend took me to Denny's on my birthday, and it was a very meaningful, nice time. And having experienced Denny's, I was like, Denny's is a solid 5 out of 10, and it's always there for you when sometimes that 5 out of 10 is what you need most. So, end up in San Francisco, GDC. Denny's is right there. And I was like, haha, Denny's reputation. Let's do a team lunch we were trying to figure out, because we have a very large, distributed, interesting artistic community of a team formation over at Strange Scaffold, the studio that I run.
Hell
yeah. We were like, what's like an affordable price? Can accommodate a lot of people, doesn't need big reservations, not incredibly expensive in San Francisco. Denny's is right there. It's also the location is right there. So plan for a team lunch at Denny's. And what ended up happening was I went to Denny's 4 times over the course of 3 days. 2 of them on purpose, and
I like that the other 2 were implied that you were like mugged and dragged there.
literally. First time was like, it's late at night, let's go to Denny's. Second time it was like, it's the morning, let's get Denny's. And a dude turned around in his seat and looked at me while I was at that Denny's table, and he said, you shouldn't be here right now. And I said, what do you mean? He says, if you're here right now, you're going to be here again. I was like, he said, by the end of the night, you will be here again. I was like, wow, that sure is a prophecy.
Does sound a little
Later
strange.
that night, I'm having visceral flashbacks to the mysterious black man who had turned around to tell me I would be there again. I was like, oh gosh, it all came true. So I'm in, did it end up being, so that was 3 times. I think the 4th time was a team lunch, so it was 5 times. 4th time was the team lunch that I couldn't get out of, and I was like, we're at Denny's again. And then
it's the bit from Snap Cube's dub where the guy playing Eggman just yells, "I'm back in the fucking building again!" No!
The final time, Rami Ismail, we walked out of the IGF Game Awards, or the Game Developers Choice Awards. I can't just say the Game Awards because Jeff Keighley will assassinate me. And
Jeff
Rami
Keighley
Ismail
ninjas.
walks out and says, "You know what you're doing, Xalavier," and he grabs me by the shoulders. And Jeff Keighley Jeff Keighley as well. No, Jeff Keighley's average height. Rami Ismail is a very tall man, a tall, large presence. Grabs me by shoulders, and I realize that this isn't a jovial grab. This is a grab of command and of direction. He says, "You're going to Denny's again." I was, because already the words had begun to spread about a Denny's guy, and he hauled me bodily across the street in active traffic. Cars were stopping and honking at us to push me through the doors of the Denny's. So ever since, I have literally been in meetings with like multi-billion-dollar corporation heads, and they'll lean across as me, starts and say, "Hey, Xalavier, it's wonderful to meet you. Just real quick, what is this thing about Denny's?" And I have to violently disassociate to hold things together.
That's so funny and weird coincidence, because my girlfriend used to work at Denny's. Her brother still works at Denny's.
So
Tell them thank you for your service.
Now you'll have to add multi-billion-dollar corporation heads and Darkfry keep asking me about this goddamn Denny's thing.
Gonna have to add in the Darkfry detail.
Yeah, and honestly,
I think this might have also come up the first time I met Shuhei Yoshida, which is not when you want to be asked about
things you want to be known for. Denny's is low on the list.
It's like, look,
I mean, imagine if you're the original Denny, though.
Yeah,
the Denny's. Do you think they could get like a conference room in there, in like the San Francisco one? Do you think they're like picking up on this? They're just gonna like get like an official like leather seats and everything, like just a specific room where you can.
What
you
if
can
that
sit
ominous?
there,
What
have
if
your
that
Denny's.
ominous guy that told you were gonna be there again was like a plant by the Denny's Corporation?
Subliminal messaging.
Well, Denny's kind of is a bit of a liminal space, vibes-wise. I think it has similar energy to some of the areas in El Paso elsewhere.
You know what has a menacing energy? Like, if Denny's is here, the menacing, like, liminal space energy is here. Village Inn. Village Inn makes me... I don't know if it's my particular association with it, but when you walk in under those vaguely office-style fluorescent lights, and it's never day or night inside of a Village Inn.
What's a Village Inn?
I am unfamiliar.
That's IKEA. IKEA's a weird place because you walk in there and time doesn't exist. There's no windows. There's no sense of external world. And you're in this like weird, like it's like you're stepping through like pieces of houses, but like not the entire room.
Y'all heard about the guy that planted fake arrows on the floor of an IKEA and like created an inescapable maze?
Just arrow stickers.
Yeah. He brought fake yellow arrows and planted them on the floor and created and just confused a bunch of people, and it worked.
That's evil. I kind of love it.
It was brilliant.
The thing that jumps to mind is that this kind of illustrates a loophole in a lot of our laws, which is you can always bring it from home. Like, if there is a stop sign and you're like, man, this place needs a stop sign, as far as I know, there's no explicit law against, one, carrying a stop sign with you, and two, planting it wherever you wish, because this is America. So
I'm genuinely curious because I think there are laws around signage stuff here with like road signage. But I'm in Canada.
I don't know what you're talking
different
about.
country.
That's different country, Aaron. Different country.
So I'm curious.
Is it a different country though?
The signage laws.
Also, like, you're not allowed to impersonate an officer of the law, but a crossing guard isn't an officer of the law. So if you just want to pull out a stop sign and wear a fluorescent vest and start directing traffic, who's gonna stop you?
A legally distinct parody of the officer of the law.
I love the idea of someone just dedicated to this, buys a legit-looking stop sign, buys the fluorescent vest, and just goes out and directs traffic for no reason. Just decides one day.
Like, you can just do it. You can just be a traffic enthusiast, and
they have a reason, which is they care about public safety.
Yeah.
That's all you need. That's all the qualifications you need.
Are y'all familiar with the story of the lovely autistic gentleman who loved trains so much that he kept going to prison for successfully impersonating a train conductor and just hijacking trains?
Oh my god.
So,
I love that guy. I love him.
Aronok, you should tell the story because it's brilliant.
I don't think I know like every in-depth detail. I've got the wiki short story version of it, but from what I understand, it's the definition of confidence, knowledge, and acting like you belong there can get you really far. And you just walk in and be like, yeah, it's my train, I'm running it. Just take the train.
All aboard!
And he would successfully run it along its route as projected, hit his time
wouldn't do anything incorrect. And he was dead on time. But he was just doing this job that he didn't have because he liked trains.
And
what
let me
about
tell
the
you,
person whose job it was, though? Like, did he have to knock him out with like some chloroform or something, and just like bundle him up?
It's Hitman, but all you do is just impersonate
for trains.
Regular workers. Because you like their job, but you don't want to get hired.
Let me tell you, this sort of oftentimes unfounded confidence and sort of authority that you belong there can get you really far in game dev too. Here's a fun fact. So hello and welcome to Video Gems, the podcast that is not brought to you by Denny's, I am your host, Dark Fry, and I'm joined by my wonderful co-hosts, Aronok and Harry from Video Games Are Bad, and this is a very, very special episode because we have with us Xalavier Nelson Jr. Xalavier, introduce yourself.
Hi,
Tell
I'm
us just
Xalavier
how
Nelson
awesome
Jr.
you are.
I'll debate the word awesome. We already see my problematic restaurant choices, but hi. Thank you first of all so much for having me. I'm Xalavier. I run a studio called Strange Scaffold. We have the mission statement, motto, and company purpose of making games better, faster, cheaper, and healthier than the industry assumes is possible. We put out 11 games in the past 5 years. We're coming up on our 5th year anniversary, including El Paso Elsewhere, the recent hit supernatural slow-mo shooter, An Airport for Aliens currently run by dogs, Sunshine Shuffle, the game that did not teach children to gamble, but did get temporarily banned from the eShop for seeming like it would. And outside of Strange Scaffold, I have also had a prolific career as a journalist and then as a dev, having racked up nearly 90 credits across the past 8 years.
That's impressive.
That's
Thank you.
incredible.
Well done.
So let's sort of go point by point there in that huge resume you just laid out. So 11 games in the past 5 years, which is just bonkers.
I
So-
feel every game. Their weight weighs on my soul and my back.
Well, look. It also has to do with the types of games you make, because you don't make exactly normal video games, and we'll get to that. But Xalavier, I just want to say that, like, as Darkfry, as this young rookie game dev called Darkfry, I'm about to say 2 things about you, and I mean them both from the bottom of my heart. You are one inspiring motherfucker.
Oh, thank you.
Like genuinely, this mission statement of making games cheaper, better, faster, and healthier is just sorely needed right now, and it's the sort of thing that I think more people and studio leads should do and should strive toward, because let's just say that the gaming industry is facing turbulent times right now.
How many
And
was fired from Riot? 500?
510.
Like, it's...
yeah, so in the face of a gaming industry that has turned into a gigantic eldritch monstrosity that devours that generates endless profit but devours countless people and man hours to do so.
and none of that profit's going to the people that
This
actually
is-
make the games.
Yeah.
Which I think is a big part of it.
This is what we need, and in a time where it's becoming increasingly terrifying to be an indie developer. So tell us a bit about how that mission statement came to be.
I have spent a lot of my career researching the conditions of creativity, not just in other mediums, but in games. How have we made games over the years? How has that shifted and altered and changed? And one of the things that's interesting about this point in history is, for the massive amount of profit flowing through this medium, there is a surprising lack of gatekeepers. You can put up your game on Steam, the largest PC platform in the world, for $100. And yes, you probably won't sell as many copies as Grand Theft Auto 5, but you're standing right next to Grand Theft Auto 5 for $100. And a bunch of our game engines are free. And we have asset stores, which allow for you to subsidize the efforts of your creation and pay other artists for the privilege. There are so many resources that exist for making games right now, and making them cheaply, and making them in a way that doesn't just build something unforgettable for players, but allows you to have a sustainable existence, or to be able to, with a few hours on the weekends, with a little bit of extra money you could put aside working retail, you can make a game, and that game can have an impact and change your life. All of that existed, and I wondered why we weren't seeing game studios built with that model. We see the quote-unquote low-effort hentai stuff that goes on Steam. There's a lot of games that do get released, far less than movies that get made in a year or books, though. And the idea that games has all the conditions for unbridled creativity, but we're instead seeing more and more of the design space for what a game is, can be, and should be becoming smaller. Indie games even becoming more formulaic. That really disturbed me. I was seeing all these innovations done in other mediums, like in music. If you've laid down a track and you're a hip-hop artist, a friend of yours can do a remix and reproduce it and build something that is distinct and new. And you both profit from that, especially if it's a dope remix. And the idea of remixing and sampling culture, and the fact that we make games in engines, the fact that people aren't sharing game engines, aren't sharing code bases, aren't saying, hey, I built a third-person shooter, you can swap out the assets and tell a new story. The fact that we're building stuff from scratch, even within the same studio, it boggled the mind. And I just kept asking, hey, so why isn't this happening? Why aren't these methods of cooperation happening? Why isn't this type of thing being built? And why isn't it being built in not just a way, but more ways? Games don't have standardized process, and that's for the best. I would go so far as to say changing one aspect of how you develop a game changes everything about its fundamental design and allows you to create something new for players. So why aren't games embracing that? I kept asking this question, and no one could give me a good answer for why not. They said, this is how it's done. They said, this is what gets funded, but not why it had to happen that way.
Because there wasn't one.
There isn't one.
A lot of systems are built on that idea of never ask why. This is just how it's done. And this is how it's been done. So we're going to keep doing it that way. And you got to accept it. And it's such an unproductive way of approaching art, especially like limiting the ways that you can engage in creativity. And I think the last couple of years, we've really seen some shifts in that, which is nice to see. I think a good example is the solo dev behind Lethal Company, who a lot of his games actually like reuse the assets of previous games he's made or are like purchased from other artists and things, and then used in a unique way to tell something new.
And importantly, he didn't receive institutional support for his work, though. And that's the division point that we're looking at, where what I've heard as a developer for the past few years is, can something made for less than $1 million really make an impact? And this is often coming from publishers who the games that put them on the map were made for less than $1 million. The idea that to make a game, there's this kind of self-perpetuating prophecy that comes along where it's like, well, if Cuphead took 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, if Stardew Valley took 8 years, and you're only putting 2 years into a game, can you really make a game as good as Cuphead? And that's a false equivalency. But that's the type of thing that happens. And you hear it from platforms and from publishers. There is a suspicion that you're viewed with if you're saying you can make a game in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, even with established technology or tools or assets before. They say, but is that really going to make a difference, though? Can that actually be profitable? Can it be a hit if it's only made with $100,000? And I grew up without money. $100,000 sounds like a lot of money to me.
It does a lot.
That's a huge amount of money.
It is a lot of money. So
years
of
living for me.
So the wild thing about being, even the label indie, right, is starting to become like really blurry, because you see even indie games now have incredible budgets
Right.
behind
Like, are
them.
we going to call like Hades 2 indie compared to sort of like the lower end of the spectrum? There's like a huge gulf there, right?
A lot of indie, what you're seeing there is people who break the mold. I think Hades, among all of Supergiant's games, broke the mold. And then you're seeing a lot of this really brain-rotted perspective that says, you know how we make more money than those guys by spending more money than those guys. That then gets applied to those same areas. So I had honest conversations. I am friends with a lot of publishing executives and so on and so forth. I've been here for a while. I was like, hey, would you have signed Vampire Survivors? And they were like, no. Because you didn't even have animations for the little dude that was walking around up until significantly post-launch. But the game felt great. It provided a unique experience that players deserved to have, and it exploded it. And there's a lot of games that fall beneath the waves as well. Worthy titles. I certainly saw those when I was a journalist. But the fact remains that there's also, when you're making a $1 million game, there's a lot of games that you don't make as a result. There's all sorts of games that it's like, oh, it doesn't make sense to make this if it's going to cost $1 million. And it's like, well, why don't you just spend the amount of money that would make sense for that game and make the game fit that shape? And that type of set the constraint for the project, set the time, set the money, build the thing within that, see how it does. That's not the way games get produced. And so a lot of my publishing executive friends, again, especially in this very scary time, what they're saying is, you see how much money Lethal Company is making? What if we put some real money behind it and actually made like a good version of that?
As if it's not already good. One, like the install level of like you have to be a certain.
So that's the thing. So that's the thing that makes that really makes Strange Scaffold and what you're doing and people like you are doing stand out, is because indie studios and even solo independent developers have, I think they're making the mistake of trying to imitate AAA companies or imitate their models or even view them as competition. When as an indie creator, you're not really competing with the giants. You're just trying to, make games that you can make that matter to you and that you can put out there. And whether they make a profit or not is sort of as an indie creator, even as a solo one, it's sort of really out there sometimes. So what Strange Scaffold does is make these like really small and focused experiences, right? And that's sort of where the magic comes from.
Some of them aren't as small, but one of the things we believe in is making the game fit the shape. And I think you've hit the nail on the head where, so originally for Space Warlord Organ Trading Simulator, the way it was literally developed was I came upon this set of systems in this game I wanted to make. I assembled a team to make it. And we literally hit pause before we started any production. I said, let me take a second look and see that I am totally confident in what this design is doing and how it will be assembled before we even start building it. If we don't know the how, then we shouldn't work on the what.
Yeah.
So it originally had the idea, a concept of a star system, and you've got a ship, and also you had organs inside you that you could like replace, and the idea of maybe you could you had those organs related to stats, and you can use those stats for skill checks. There's a long list of stuff, and there's a game in there. There's a game you could make. Maybe there's even a game worth making. But as far as the game we would enjoy making, and the game that needed to exist, it was like, well, does it need to have a star map where you travel to different market boards, or is it a clearer and more fun experience if there's just one market?
Mm-hmm.
And we had those discussions and decisions and set those constraints ahead of time. And we're like, there's one market board. Okay. There isn't going to be a ship. Like the stats of your ship and travel times and how that has to do with market fluctuations, that doesn't really make sense. It is bigger, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's better. The main thing we care about is just the ship hull. We care about you actually physically having organs that you have to manage their placement in your hull and what they're doing to each other. It turns out that's far cheaper and, again, a better experience for the players. I don't believe in shortcuts. El Paso Elsewhere is a big-ass game, but it's also not bigger than what it needs to be to have the impact it needs to have for players. It sets itself up to achieve the intention and to provide something beautiful for players, no more and no less, and that gives us a foundation to build on for the future, as well as if it had been a disaster, that gives us the out to say, well, that didn't work out, but we learned something. And it's that perspective that's driven us to really say, like, in the most capitalist mindset, I don't care about selling someone one giant game. I want to sell them 5. I want to create, like your favorite musician, such a catalog of creativity that when you get into it, you're like, dang, I loved Space Warlord Organ Training Simulator. They've made another 11 games. I'm going to go play those. And we see that happen. Literally,
Yeah.
I can see the little upticks on Steam. Sometimes it's one person, literally, that they buy one game, and I see the next day someone has purchased every other game we've done, and I'm like, I see you. I see you.
It's to make some comparisons, it's a little like video essays or indie filmmakers, where often you'll have someone that like watches one video and they'll go through and comment on every other video you've ever made, and you're like, oh you're interested in the art that I'm making. No, and just to bring it around to like the ballooning budgets in the more AAA space, I think there's a big comparison to be made with how film has moved in the last 2-3 decades, where you've seen a real death of that like mid-budget film for a long time, until A24 kind of brought it back to some extent. And so
now
very,
A24
very
is saying that they want to move into more action-focused titles to be more mainstream. Very scary.
And it's definitely, but there are actually like there's titles like that you can still make at a really good quality at a mid-budget. And I think the important thing is just, again, I think with any artistic pursuit, whether it's video games or it's video essays, whether it's film, is like understanding what that project needs to be. You know, I've been part of huge projects, I've been part of small projects. It really depends on what it needs to be and what services the work. And I think that's a really valuable mindset. Like, you understood that El Paso Elsewhere needed that time and needed that length and size to impact the story that it needed to tell. Whereas I think like if that same game, same script, everything was made by like a AAA company, they'd be like, well, we need to add like 5 more systems because there's just not enough systems for marketing.
That's
what
part of
am
why
I
we didn't sign with
supposed
the
to
publisher.
advertise?
They literally, like, we would get asked in meetings, so like, why does the player keep playing? And that is a valid question.
Feels good.
But also, like, they were like, we were like, no, you don't upgrade your ability to dive. Like, you don't have to unlock your ability to dive. You should just be able to dive and shoot in slow motion from the beginning. You don't have to upgrade your weapons. You don't have to have a skill tree for this game to be the best version of itself.
Could you imagine El Paso Elsewhere with a skill tree?
That didn't come up, did it?
Good.
But
it makes me think. It makes me think about like Doom, right? Like the original Doom. It still sells copies. It's still a popular game that people will play through from start to finish. And really, structurally, Doom and El Paso Elsewhere share a lot of DNA in terms of progression, which is that you get new weapons, and that does change the dynamics of play, and you get new enemies that also change that dynamic to increase difficulty. So new tools, but also new challenges.
So what do you mean?
What do you mean?
Why would someone keep playing El Paso Elsewhere? Bro, I gotta stop my ex-girlfriend Dracula, which also happens to be the plural of Dracula, from doing an evil ritual that destroys the world. What don't you get? Like, come on.
And players got it. And we have had people like Xbox believed in us from very early, and
that's good.
It's been things like that have not just kept us alive but like it's helped us keep the faith. Is like, players keep showing up. New faces keep showing up. New partners. We're working with Frosty Pop on our next game, which is a horror fantasy kidnapping sim. Frosty Pop is a game studio that, unbeknownst to me, has been also trying to make games better, faster, cheaper, and healthier this entire time. And also, as a result, kind of stood alone in the space. They were mainly making mobile stuff, but they were making non-exploitative mobile games to serve a variety of players and putting them into the world. And it's like, we both looked at each other and we just said, why, if we can't, if we're not finding the industry at large putting mass support behind our perspective, we can just support each other. And now here's Frosty Pop, again, getting into our corner. It means that there's a lot of opportunities Strange Scaffold does not necessarily qualify for. But that also means that there's a lot of paths we didn't go down that would have destroyed us.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And another important thing about making many like small focused things is that if one of them fails, it won't implode your studio necessarily. Like yeah, failures are bad, but they're not like projects that are too big to fail.
It's the
Is that correct? Like what happens if say El Paso, I believe it's done quite well, right? But what would have happened if El Paso had potentially not done quite as well? Would that have like tanked everything, or?
We knew before the game came out that the studio would survive, which is more than most studios can say.
Yeah.
If all of the things fail, then it's a really bad time. Maybe maybe we do put down shop, but one or two games or even more failing, which thankfully has not been the case. As you said, yeah, you have distributed bets. A lot of my friends and colleagues who I deeply respect, very smart people, had told me years ago, El Paso Elsewhere is going to be the big one. Put everything into El Paso Elsewhere. And the thing that ended up saving El Paso Elsewhere is all of the things we were doing. The games that were bringing in cash month after month. The freelance gigs I was still doing. The projects that we had in our deck that got signed. We had a project that got canceled, that we canceled to like survive 2023 because it was a rough year. That got uncanceled because someone saw it in our overall portfolio deck and was like, that looks really cool. Are you making that? It's like, well, we could make that again if you gave us money. And that was one of the things that helped us stay alive to finish El Paso Elsewhere. I believe in, again, giving players more things, but also giving developers more chances to grow and succeed and explore.
I mean, the saying isn't, dude, put all your eggs in that one basket.
Yeah, no, that's really what it comes down to. It's like if you hedge all your bets on this one artistic work, you're setting yourself up for failure, really. And it's not. I think it's also just like not fair to developers working for a studio if you're running a studio. Because you're putting not just yourself at risk, but everybody else involved in the project at risk if you're not thinking about those types of things. And I love that you emphasize healthier, like not just faster and cheaper, but healthier as a core tenet. Because if there's one tenet that's completely lacking from the wider industry, it's definitely a mentality of healthiness for developers, especially.
We have a lot of justification of action in hindsight, and I will say that's a very tempting thing to do as a studio head. If your game gets 10s out of 10s at launch, I'll tell you the exact experience we had coming up to El Paso Elsewhere. For the most of the dev cycle, we did not crunch. The last few months on El Paso Elsewhere, because we didn't know that we had basically initiated a cyclical dev cycle where script would do a thing, which would impact music, which would impact level, which would impact music again, which would impact script. And that kind of thing meant that, especially near the end, I was spending dozens of hours playing through the game, noting things that needed to change, playing through the game, noting and changes would be happening by the day across the entire department. It was rough. But for most of the dev cycle, we had reasonable and flexible hours. And when we hit launch and we were exhausted, I had already prepared the team. We genuinely thought, I was like, hey, I think we're going to get 6s and 7s. We make focused games. It's going to reach players, I think. But the review scores attached to what we've done here, especially given that, like, we hit V1, I think, on, like, Sunday night, and the game was coming out Tuesday. So that meant that press had been playing a partially broken build that we were fixing by the day for, like, a few weeks. I was like, we're going to get 6s and 7s. We made a good thing. We believe in what we made, but don't expect to be getting a higher review score. And then came in an 8, and then a 9, and then a 10, and then another 9, and then another 8, and we kept getting 8s, 9s, 10s, 8, 9, 10. And there was this well of relief in the group chat. People literally from around the world who had worked on this game all sitting there going like, wait, what? And seeing people excited to jump into the world we had created. And I literally had the Frodo Lord of the Ring moment of being, no, better example would be Gandalf. Like, he looks at the ring, and I was like, we could do it all again. And in the group chat, I said it partially to keep myself accountable to the rest of the teammates. I was like, I'm literally feeling probably the exact same rush that a lot of our peers have of standing at this precipice, and we're all so exhausted. But it feels like all of that lifts because people get it. And there's that rush and that high, and you want to editorialize and in hindsight and say, it was all worth it because look. But our process and our ideals, we did not achieve all of them on Strange Scaffolds. So as well as the game has done, I see the project as a partial failure. Huge creative success. But in terms of process, if we did not fully fulfill the mandate, then there is a point of massive improvement to be had, not a directive to do it again, but more to try to get a bigger financial or critical burst of recognition. And so, yeah, that's what Strange Scaffold does. We look at the shiny thing. We look at the Ring of Power and we say, actually, no, it's actually pretty cool to be in the Shire and to drink with your best short kings, your favorite tiny dudes.
Hell yeah.
I really appreciate you sharing that story and sharing your perspective of mistakes being made. And I think that's, I actually talked about this in an upcoming video, but I think it's a really important thing for people in general, but especially, you know, in your relationships with other people, in how you interact with other people. Like the healthiest thing you can do is be able to recognize that you make mistakes, and that's how we grow. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head in that I think a lot of executives and things see a thing succeed, regardless of how many other things have gone wrong, and go, that was all good. It justifies everything we've done. We can do it again and worse. I mean, bigger.
The end justified the means. So,
Yeah.
Xalavier,
BioWare had the term BioWare magic.
Hell yeah.
BioWare magic.
So, this, I want to go back to the point where having, you know, spreading out your bets, as we said earlier, makes it so that you're not necessarily as scared of failure as like other bigger projects that where failure is life or death. And like an indie studio going bankrupt after they release a game is above average in the industry now. So and to go back to an even earlier point of this, creating games is at the same time is in a weird, like, paradoxical spot of it's the most accessible it's ever been, but also the most terrifying it's ever been. And most people that are like me, that are like, aspiring beginner developers that want to like make shit, it's scary. It's rough out there. It's tough to do it. And you know, when you ask a veteran game dev for advice on how to get started, they will inevitably tell you to just do it. And it may sound like a cop out, but it's genuinely the best advice you can give, to like do it in a way that you can, in the scope that you're able, and to just get started creating. I think it's a tweet from Sam Person that I'm about to shamelessly steal. That when most people ask that question, they're not actually asking for advice, they're asking for permission. And so seeing your model of creating smaller games, I should say, and like covering a lot of different artistic endeavors, a lot of different genres, a lot of experimentation, a lot of creativity on display that says you can really make anything and do it in a way that's focused and well directed and that can succeed. It is so encouraging. It is so encouraging for a beginner game developer that it really conveys the message that, yo, I can actually just get started making games and make this small thing that I want to make, because I know that there are people like me that really want this very specific niche experience that I'm passionate about, and they will find that same passion in. And to just be able to do that because they see people like you finding success doing that. And that the projects I make I don't have to compete with frigging Rockstar or Hades or anything else. Like, those big giants are not my competition. They're just, they're just sort of games that I'll exist alongside with.
Games is a big ecosystem. There's a lot to enjoy.
Yes.
And one thing to keep in mind is you can make a $5,000 video game. You can make a $1,000 video game. You can make a $500 video game. Rockstar can't. So you get to make games that if you make a $500 video game that isn't trying to be a $5 billion video game, you get to make the experiences for players that they can't fulfill because they have to look for literally, like, they don't just have a maximum budget, they have a minimum. They have a minimum of, okay, if it doesn't take a minimum of 5 years, then it doesn't make sense for us to build. If you can make a $500 game, the thing that I encourage people to advocate for is don't follow me, but look for what is the game and the process that fulfills you and that you can do without perishing in the process, because no one can copy that. Naughty Dog cannot shove you out of making a $500 video game. You're the only person who can build whatever fits that shape.
Yes.
I think an important part of that, like, just make things sort of, and this is in any artistic medium, and you'll hear that advice from anyone experienced in any art medium when someone new or starting goes, well, how do I start? And it sounds trite that the answer is just do it, but I think what we're really saying when we say that is you have to accept that you're going to fail. Like, you can't get good at any skill ever without messing up in some way. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the final thing you release is a failure. And there's many different metrics, but you got to make mistakes, and you got to be willing to make mistakes if you're going to grow. And I think that's part of why I appreciate that your model, tries that experimentation and tries little smaller things that lets you do more and fail. fail more, if that makes sense. Like,
I,
failure is a good thing.
I have
to
a
me.
goal this year, which is to release a game on like itch.io. So again, not like a huge game, right? Not even on Steam, just itch for free, probably, that 5 people will play. And I think from doing that, it's not going too badly, but from doing that, I think the greatest part about it is sucking at something. Like just being really, really bad at it, just making so many mistakes over and over and over, and just sort of trying to find not even just the best, not even the best way, but just sort of like the way that works for me, and that is easy. And it's great that I don't really have to worry too much about failure, because the sort of goal is just, well, put it on itch.
Sucking at things is awesome.
So good.
Sucking at things is so fun. Xalavier, you talked recently about how the JPEGs in an airport for aliens sort of came about because by mistake you placed a placeholder image and made it like an 8-foot tall JPEG of a dog. So sort of one of the most endearing and memorable aspects of that game came about because of a mistake that you made, because you were like just starting out using an engine, Unity, right? Was you just started
It
out
was Unity.
using
And
Unity.
if I was making a $3 million game, I couldn't just say, you know what, this is the best version of this game. Let's just do it. It's JPEGs now.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm going to go buy a ticket to go to the frigging Mars or whatever from a JPEG of a dog named Chad Shakespeare. Can I do this in a game made by frigging Bethesda? No. I can't do that in a Bethesda game.
I think an interesting thing with just art history is how much innovation came out of mistakes. I'm sure we all know the like single sword slash pause for a solid second blood spurt, right? Like that type of shot in anime and in film, in action series. That came out of an error in I'm trying to remember the name of the film. The original shot that did that, it was actually an error with the blood machine they had. It didn't fire right away, and they only had like enough film stock and blood stuff and costume. They could only shoot once, and so the version that's in the final film, this like super famous shot of someone getting cut and wait a couple of seconds, is a mistake, and it's now like this really iconic part of sword fights in general, especially samurai sword fights, and it comes from this one Japanese film that they made a mistake on, and because they didn't have a massive budget and because they couldn't just reshoot, they just kind of had to take it as is, and it works.
It's really cool.
There's that experimentation that occurs when you don't have infinite resources and the ability to just keep iterating on it. I think that's a really important thing that like artists, I think we all often get in our own heads about what we're making, because we're so like, and so we're like, oh, this is bad or whatever, and people will never realize the mistakes you make. Like I had a Pardon a Khadijah and Bo video last year where I accidentally sent them the footage with this like red line I'd used to line up the green screen footage, so that when it zoomed in and out, like it wasn't like weirdly changing the position. And Khadijah and the audience both thought that I had very sincerely like done that as an artistic decision. and it was just like, commentary on being
yes.
You can't see people fully from outside, or like something about perspectives and things. I can remember there's a really good comment where someone like laid out what they thought it was. Then and my favorite response to that one, because I left a comment in the video just being like, oh, I totally messed this up, was someone had left this like really beautiful comment about how they didn't analyze that, and they decided like they'd gotten this meaning from it. And the beauty of art is that like it was a mistake, it also has that meaning because you got that meaning from it. And I don't know,
We
no
love
AAA
it when they
studio.
give us too much credit. We love it. So Xalavier, so one last thing that I want to ask you. So I want to know about Xalavier the artist. Because yes, the artiste. So recently, you started sort of branching out into like other artistic mediums and incorporating that in your games. And also, I want to congratulate you on getting Idris Elba to voice the main character of El Paso Elsewhere. That was very impressive.
It was a big pull. I was like, you're gonna have to break your contract with Cyberpunk, but it's gonna be worth it. And
I'm kidding. So I'm kidding, of course. So you voice the main character of El Paso Elsewhere and did an amazing job. So generally dabbling
It's a really good performance.
Generally dabbling in some voice acting. My favorite line, I'm going to tell you my favorite line in an El Paso Elsewhere right now is
I think I can guess.
What?
Is it the bathroom werewolf?
No.
That line is incredible.
that line is great, but my favorite line, it's really stupid, but it made me laugh a lot. I don't feel safe. I feel dangerous.
Yeah.
This
I love
line made me laugh way too much.
Of the character in general with the writing, because there's this really fun tongue-in-cheek of like very serious and very silly like placed right side by side that creates this really great contrast that I think adds to the comedy. Yeah.
So
there's
you
gonna
also
be a lot of guns. It's Texas. There should be a lot of guns.
So like you started dabbling in some voice acting, and you got signed by an agency, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, I'm doing stuff with CAA.
Hell yeah! So that's awesome, and congratulations on that. But I want to ask you, how are you feeling about dabbling in stuff like voice acting and rap music and incorporating that in your creative projects?
I mean, it comes from a very similar place, and I really appreciate the kind words, but it comes from a really similar place of all the stuff I've done, where it was like, well, I don't know if anyone's ever going to give me a chance in comics, so I'll just make my own comics. I'll figure out what's a fair rate to pay people. I'll figure out what my limitations are. I will explore that medium, and I've done it, and now I've been like hired to do comics by other people, which is really cool. For El Paso Elsewhere, I'd done performance before, but never like anything large scale or that was a significant piece of character work at all. So knowing how much I desired that and how much that potentially lived within me, I was like, okay, if no one else is going to give me the shot, I'll give it to myself. So that was the case for the music. That was the case for the voice acting. It wasn't that there was not a precedent for the work. It was that if I wanted to be trusted with doing it on a larger stage, I was not going to wait for someone else to give me the opportunity. I would just do it where I was with what I had right now. That was how I started in game dev. I started with Twine because all I knew was like some basic CSS as a journalist. So that's what I did. And that's part of why I, again, advocate so strongly for people in saying, hey, you might not even be good at a thing. You might not be a good voice actor or musician. But don't you deserve to find out?
In fact, you probably aren't very good. No offense.
You have to be bad at the start. You have to be. No, but that's a valuable point. Like it's you to do anything, you kind of have to suck first. And the thing is that we usually see people only through when they stop sucking. you know, or when they get good enough outside of those, very, very, very rare instances of someone
Look at any of our old
who's
videos.
so naturally related to like, you can easily see the quality, but like,
not mine. My first video was awesome.
but I definitely have had similar experiences with, you know, editing, with voice acting, with writing, with digital art. Cause I've been doing commissioned digital art since I was like 16, and animation, like all of those different things that you do. You suck first, and you have to suck to get good. Like it's kind of step one is suck, and then you get better by doing it. But if you never try, you know, you never know. You're never gonna know if you're gonna be good, because you're always gonna stay at wherever the point. Like if you never do it, you're never gonna get better, and you're never gonna know if you could be good at it, or great at it, or amazing at it. And yeah, I also had a couple of questions more focused on game design stuff. So one comes from my friend Danny, who really enjoyed El Paso Elsewhere, by the way, who asked, it's pretty clear that you have a big love and understanding of Remedy's body of work, especially Max Payne and Control. They're wondering if there was anything that Remedy does that you think the game industry at large should learn from.
Anything that Remedy does that I think the games industry at large should learn from is, I think they really embrace I really think they really embrace the things that they love, and that's part and parcel with what we were just talking about for voice acting. Maybe you're good at it, maybe you're bad, but as you do it, you can also figure out if you want to do more of it. And if you never do it, or if you just launch yourself head first and that is your one thing. I have friends who are resetting their careers in game dev right now because they got into the industry. They just wanted to get their foot in the door. They ended up going really high in a discipline. Maybe it's audio. Maybe it's programming. What they wanted all along was to write stories and be a narrative designer. And now they're a director level audio person, sound designer, what have you, saying, that isn't what makes me happy, and it is what I do day to day forever. And they're taking the really bold and necessary step of saying, you know, I actually don't like it all that much. I'm going to do the thing that makes me happy. And they're having a little bit of a setback, but they're also loving what they do and having a safe environment to figure out if you want to keep doing a thing. I like writing music. I like performing music. I don't know if I ever want to do a full album again, but I had the chance to figure out things by doing them. So to bring it all the way back, Remedy has for years not just had interests, but in steps figured out how to pursue them. A little bit more live action, a little bit more live action, a little bit more live action, until like Alan Wake 2 has large portions that are just straight on, beautifully filmed and written cinematics. And a lot of studios will either jump headlong into a thing, or regardless of their interest in actually doing that thing, they're like, well, we have no interest or knowledge about a games as a service title, but I guess we gotta build one now.
Yeah, that's. I also think that touches on.
It's a dark path.
An element of both your work and Remedy's work that I noticed, which is a really sincere love and celebration of your influences. Like, and I think that's a really valuable thing as an artist in general. And I just have another question, kind of building off of that one, which is when you're designing El Paso Elsewhere, because I think it really does look back at certain eras of design that have kind of been abandoned, or I always think of design as like lineages. Like it's kind of like genealogy, you know, this mechanic gets, you know, modified in this way by this studio, and this way by this studio, and you get different types of games from that. And I think the design styling that El Paso Elsewhere engages with aspects of that sort of Max Payne style of third person, with the using slow-mo to help you out, but you evolve it in new ways. And I was curious about your thought process on looking at these styles of design or play that had been abandoned by the industry at large, and trying to do something new with those.
I'd say
like raising an abandoned child.
I'd say whenever you're looking to become a spiritual successor of anything, you have to love the material, but also be critical of it. It's why my favorite licensed things that I've worked on are all things that I did not have a deep personal attachment to. I really appreciate and respect the work of Stranger Things. I've really enjoyed what I've watched of it. It is not my special interest, and having a universe that I respect, but can also have a small amount of distance in to say, how do I tell the next interesting story here for people? How do I respect what's gone before, but also push it in new directions or necessary changes? That's all really important. So from a design perspective, El Paso Elsewhere, and the reason we don't have enemies that shoot bullets at you, was me looking at a variety of design factors, including, like, you spend a lot of time in Max Payne just dying and restarting, and it's like, it relies really heavily on quick saves and quick loads.
Same with
and
Doom.
It can feel arbitrary. And it's like, there's a really interesting asymmetry that happens if you have melee enemies and people who challenge you in different ways. We basically took Max Payne and looked at the enemy variety of Quake and said, if you have enemies that operate in different patterns, you will function in a different way when you walk into a space. It becomes
I'm so
about
glad
movement.
that I was correctly recognizing that interconversation between like the Quake Doom lineage and the Max Payne third person. Sorry, validating of my analysis.
Absolutely, you were dead on, and so we made a bullet time game without bullets because it let us make a more interesting game.
Definitely.
And to give you all a little bit of a sneak peek, like if in El Paso Elsewhere 2, if we ever get the chance to do that, I would put in enemies with bullets, but they'd be existing alongside this combat balance we built now. So being able to respect what's been done before and kind of like the systems of our industry say, but I can't do it the same way you did. Because otherwise I don't actually respect the effort. All I do is respect the result. I think that's really key. And it's a difference between a retread and something that establishes a universe of its own.
Yeah. And I think that comes back to that conversation we were having earlier about the building off of different assets, building off of other people's concepts. I think video games are such a collaborative art form at baseline because entire genres only exist because one person tried something new. Other people want, I like that, but what if it was this way or is this way? There was an era where the FPS was just called the Doom clone.
Yep.
And it's hard to think about when you look at like the landscape of first-person shooters now, because there's such a wide-reaching array of types of games, all using the same fundamental verbs and actions, but in very, very different ways. And I think that's the beauty of video games as an art form. Now I have a question about narrative, which I found really interesting going into the game because, as a woman, I was a little apprehensive that a story about like an evil X type of thing might go in a certain direction when written by a man. Yeah. And I was just wondering, like, how much were you thinking about that when you're writing? Because I think you did a really good job, and I don't give that type of compliment lately. Like, I really do think that you managed to avoid, I think, a lot of the pitfalls of a lot of stories about X's in general, where they kind of like, you managed to make a literal monster a vampire, but like not demonize in a weird way that I think a lot of other material does.
My favorite scene in El Paso Elsewhere is there's a point where they play Truth or Dare with each other, and it's like a flashback with Truth or Dare.
Like that scene
and
well.
that one scene, it there were very few like actual interactions between James and Dracula in El Paso Elsewhere, but just that one scene gave such a clear idea of their dynamic and relationship. Was so good.
Really, really good character writing there.
Yes, thank you. I knew how big of a thing we were taking on because I get irritated at X stories for the same reasons. Usually X stories are also self-justifications. They're essentially trials held without the other party, and you can feel it. Of like, I was innocent, they were guilty, look at what happened. And it's so funny. One of my favorite examples of this is, I think, I don't know if it's called The Last 5 Years. It's a musical with Anna Kendrick. Yes.
Okay.
Jason Robert Brown wrote a musical called The Last 5 Years. It is about this guy who he finally, after so many years of struggling, gets his big break, and simultaneously, he, as a poor artist, like he has his partner, and as his star continues to rise, he gets farther away from his partner, and their marriage crumbles. And it literally has a song in there. It's a musical. It's a great musical, but it literally has a song in there that's basically like, "Woe is me. Everyone wants to fuck me now, and I just gotta do it. I just gotta do it. I'm just such a big boy now." And like the funniest thing about that musical and that movie is that he created that musical. It's now obviously been produced on Broadway and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Every person who directs that musical directs it as if he's the villain.
And that's what's so funny about it, because he is the villain, but he has no self-awareness.
He doesn't know it. And so like a character
it's Tommy Wiseau making a story about how women are bad and evil that just is a story about how Tommy Wiseau is a misogynist. Like, that's what The Room is. Like, The Room is this weird encapsulation of this. He's the villain and he's meant to be the protagonist, and it's so fascinating.
But it's like on accident, kind of. But
it's totally on accident. It's not meant to. Like, it's very clearly intending this one perspective. But I think certain people, their ego gets so big that they become so self-unaware that they like leave in all of these elements that are self-critical in fascinating ways. That was Jesse and I co-write for Jesse Gender. Jesse and I were working on this video right now on William Shatner's Invasion, Iowa, which is this really weird prank show. And in it, like, William Shatner does, like, and the creators, they think they're commenting on being like vapid Hollywood people, and they just end up being them. Like, it's so weird.
At some point, you become the thing you parody.
Yeah, something like that. And no, but I just bring it back around to the game. Like, I just really want to focus on you managed to handle that story well, and you're talking about that.
I'd say the way that we did that, outside of just like good writing, I think it's bad writing to end up self-mythologizing and making commentary about your exes. I think really one of the things that really helped lean into that was, so there's a level called Central Location, and there's a set of 3 lines that you get during gameplay that I think is in a lot of ways kind of it just says the themes out loud, which is, it's kind of nice being trapped with the person. There's a closeness. You miss it when it's gone. It's the comfort of being suffocated, of knowing the breath pouring out of your lungs is flowing into another person's lips, and vice versa. I was good at being trapped. I was fucking good, and I don't get to feel that way anymore.
Yeah.
There's no blame either way. It is just a very heartfelt, real, looking you in the eyes depiction of a dynamic. And it acknowledges that for an abusive relationship to work, you have to have loved someone at some point. So why did you love them? Why did you stay?
And as someone who's been through some really, I'm not going to touch on that stuff in specifics, but just, who's had some lived experiences of things, like, I really think that you handled things with more reality than most works even try to, in a really healthy way. And I think that was interesting because you managed to do that without, I think, losing that comedic tone. Like, it balances the comedic elements and these more dramatic elements, these more serious elements really well, to boost each other. Something I talk about in the next video that I'm working on. With some,
this is all still important. Happening. This is still such a heartfelt moment and stuff. But you're still in a motel, trapped in a void.
You're actively shooting werewolves with a shotgun while he's talking about how nice it feels to be suffocated.
No, it's great. I think it's great because it has those contrasts, and I think I talk about this in the video, and I'm talking about it more from the Hollywood side of things, but I think it applies to video games as well, because there's this like distinct lack of desire to risk anything in how they're creating stuff. There's a distinct lack of desire to emotionally risk something with your story that a lot of Hollywood and stuff does, and thus a lack of sincerity. You kind of get these very empty works.
And
because they can't allow
sincerity.
themselves to be both things.
I think that's the key word: sincerity in everything. In everything that is created. So with that final message, we have reached the end of this episode. So Xalavier, any final words?
You can find my work at Rit Nelson on the social media hell sites where I choose to still post. You can find my studio at Strange Scaffold on a bunch of places. One of the games I worked on and was co-lead on, Defender's Quest 2, comes out soon. It's a game 10 years in the making. Cult hit sequel. I had the chance to help them bring it to a conclusion and write a story that fills that world. So you can look out for that, and also look out for a horror fantasy kidnapping sim, Life Eater, from Strange Scaffold soon. Thanks so much for having me.
You keep coming
Thank you so much for being here.
You keep coming up with the strangest genres. It's been such a joy to talk to you. I tried not to fanboy too much, and I think I succeeded. And thank you all so very much for listening. We will see you next time. Goodbye.